care of everybody in the Columbia area and your roof. 803-590-7870. $12 o'clock on your Monday afternoon. Now, welcome in. It is indeed the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo today. Terry Ford should be back in tomorrow, as far as I know. Yeah, it's one of those things, like when he tells me he's not going to be here, I don't ask questions. It's not my business to know where he goes. I just anticipate him to be back on whatever day he says he's going to be back. So I believe Terry Ford will be back in here joining me coming up tomorrow. But for today, flying solo, Elijah going to jump in with me in the 2 o'clock hour. I'll have plenty to talk about, as it was a very, very busy weekend in regards to all sports, really, particularly basketball, as the NCAA tournament rolled along. Of course, sans South Carolina after their loss to Oregon in round number 1 last Thursday. I do have to ask, how's your bracket looking? is still intact. Mine is about shattered to pieces. And funny enough, I did actually move up a little bit coming away from round number 1, where I was about 15 millionth. Following round number 2, I'm now 13,931,293rd. So moving up a little bit, though I did lose the Final Four team at Auburn, and trust me, we'll get to all that over the course of the show. But a very fun weekend of basketball, as still have plenty of the top dogs still live, all 4 of the number 1 seeds, as well as a couple surprises rolling along as well. And you know, I enjoy the second round games. They're plenty fun too, and a lot of excitement can come from those. But man, there's nothing quite like the magic of that first round. You know what I mean? That Thursday and Friday where you just have wall-to-wall games, and games on top of each other, and you're switching channels, and you got 2 and 3 screens going, and there's just something so fun about that as you get into the second round and on into Sweet 16 and all that kind of stuff, it dissipates a little bit. Not to say those games aren't fun, because I still am just as excited for the Sweet 16 coming up here this upcoming weekend as I was for the round 2 games. But something about just the chaos and unpredictability of those first round matchups, just makes that all the more fun. From a SEC standpoint, it was not the best start to the NCAA tournament, with, of course, South Carolina losing to Oregon, Michigan State in the first game of the tournament getting beaten by Michigan State. We, of course, have talked ad nauseum about the Kentucky loss to Oakland in round number 1. Florida loses a high-scoring affair against Colorado, and the one that probably sticks out the most is Auburn losing to Yale. Now, when you talk about Auburn and Bruce Pearl, this season specifically, I think a lot of people, including myself, had them penciled in for the Final Four. This truly looked like a dominant team. They won 26 of their 27 wins, came by double digits. The only one that didn't was in the SEC tournament semis against Mississippi State. They won that game by 7, but they are gotten so used to dominating teams. And when you look at the matchup on paper of them against Yale, it should have been no contest that Auburn was going to go out there and beat them pretty convincingly. You can debate back and forth whether they took them seriously enough or not, but regardless, Auburn did not play their best game of basketball against Yale. And for a team in Auburn that has not fared well in tight games, especially when you are allowing a scrappy team like Yale to hang in there and for it to be close in the waning minutes, advantage is going to go to a team like Yale. And they obviously ended up pulling off the victory 78-76. Now, again, if they go out there and play that game 9 more times, Auburn likely wins 8 of those. But you go out there and you don't put your best foot forward against a scrappy team that they themselves just won the Ivy League on a crazy shot against Brown a couple of weeks ago. You give a scrappy team like that any kind of life late in the game, you're usually going to pay for it. And that's exactly what happened to Auburn, losing in the first round once again. Actually losing their first ever first-round game. Correction there. This time against Yale. And the conversation around Bruce Pearl is certainly an interesting one. Look, he's not going to lose his job. He's not concerned of getting fired or anything like that. But you do have to look at his record acumen lately at Auburn and kind of wonder what needs to change. Now, yes, they made the Final Four in 2019, and I brought this up earlier. If you go back, it took a little bit of a miracle or a little bit of chaos at the end of their first-round game back then against New Mexico State for them to even advance into the round of 32 that year, and then they made the run towards the Final Four. But since then, of course, 2020, COVID kept the tournament from happening. 2021, they weren't eligible for it after, had a bad year anyway, so it didn't really make a difference. But since then, they haven't made it past the second round. And then you add on to losing the first ever round of 64 game, you just kind of wonder, like, okay, what is possible with this team? Because this is as good as they've looked. A dominant regular season, a dominant run through the SEC tournament. South Carolina, we saw that up close and personal between the game at Neville Arena and the game in Nashville the other week. This was it seemed like an unstoppable Auburn team. And they get tripped up in the first round. And folks on the Plains not happy about it, rightfully so. I mean, if Auburn replicates this season that they had next year, I don't think anybody's going to be picking them to go that deep because they haven't shown the ability to do that as of late. I remember last week talking to one of the Auburn, or a couple weeks ago, talking to one of the Auburn insiders leading into the rematch between Carolina and Auburn, and I asked the question of if he thought and his name's escaping me, forgive me. I asked the question of if he thought Bruce Pearl was a good tournament coach, talking specifically then about the SEC tournament, and it wasn't a definitive yes. And we're seeing that once again. His team was not ready to go. They weren't ready to play against a team that on paper they are head and shoulders better than. And it got him bounced. And that's the unfortunate reality when you're in the NCAA tournament. No mulligans. You lose one and you're out. And for what, again, was a dominant season, finished tied for second in the SEC regular season, win the SEC tournament, for a program like Auburn that expects more out of their team, kind of a wasted year in my opinion, because you didn't capitalize on it. You didn't make the most of it. Now, did that mean that Auburn had to go out and win the national championship? No. But I think a Sweet 16 berth, honestly, I think an Elite 8 berth at minimum was probably where the bar should have been set for this team. That's how darn good they are, let alone the Final Four. And now they're watching the rest of the tournament from the couch. And Bruce Pearl, he had his comment about this has nothing to do with us not taking them seriously. I don't know about that. Certainly didn't look like your team was ready to play in that game on Friday. I know our guy Jay Phillips, I think, had the best line for it, that Yale caught Auburn with their pants down. And I think that's the best way to put it. Now, yes, you had Chad Baker-Mazara that got ejected early on in that game, but still, even with a key player like that being out, that shouldn't have been the reason why Auburn was in that tight of a game with Yale to the end. And again, for a team that wasn't used to playing in tight games, or at least not winning tight games, they came back to bite them. So, tough pill to swallow there for Auburn. The Kentucky thing's pretty interesting as well. We obviously reacted to the loss on Friday after they got bounced in the first round matchup against Oakland. There's a decision to be made up there in Lexington. Reading all the reports, a guy from KSR was on Twitter Spaces Sunday night talking about, Coach Cal. There's conversations being had at least, and a decision will likely to come down either late today or early tomorrow on, if he keeps rolling as the Kentucky head coach. And I know it's probably like, oh, that's asinine. Well, why would they fire him? By the way, they have a $33 million buyout. Are they willing to pony up that money just for Calipari to not continue to coach at Kentucky? Yeah, it sounds like they are. High standard. High standard when you're coaching at Kentucky. Duh. One of the Blue Bloods, one of the most successful programs in college basketball history. And it just seems like Coach Calipari just doesn't have it as of late. Able to put together great regular seasons, great SEC tournaments, but they can't get out of their own way in the NCAA tournament. 3 straight seasons not making it past the second round. 2 of those 3 years, including this year, getting bounced by a double-digit seed in the round of 64. And you're talking, going on 12 years since the national championship? That's unacceptable in Kentucky standards. And it sounds like they're at least having the conversation on if they want Coach Cal to be their future there. And when you talk about a ravenous, passionate fan base up there in Kentucky, yeah, $33 million, that's a lot. But if they really want to move on from him, I can almost guarantee you they'll find a way to scrounge up that money. Maybe they've already done it. Maybe that's what the decision is seeing if they've got the dough to make this move happen. If so, I don't know who you go out and get, but it does certainly seem like the Calipari run, and look, tons of success early on. Elite Eights, Final Fours, national championships, all that stuff. But these past handful of years, really, since COVID, you missed the tournament, and then 3 straight years of not getting past the round of 32, which, again, is unacceptable by Kentucky standards. So something to certainly keep an eye on in these next 24 hours or so on what Kentucky ultimately decides to do with John Calipari, and if his tenure as the head coach in Lexington is truly going to come to an end. So that's what was happening on the men's side of things. Women, just dominant run through the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament for them. We'll dive into that. Also hear from Coach Staley on what she had to say about her team's great start to yet another hopeful pursuit of a national championship in 2024. That's coming up here on the halftime show. Quickly, though, I want to remind you about the 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Tournament coming up on April the 5th at Hardwood Golf Club in West Columbia. If you want to take part, it's $400 for a foursome, $200 for a pair. 10 a.m. shotgun start. Going to be giving away USC baseball tickets, Carowin tickets, concert tickets, craft beer passport, and more. If you want to take part, give Charlotte a call, 803-755-2000 to register. Again, 803-755-2000 to register for the 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Tournament coming up next Friday for Final Four weekend, starting off Final Four weekend up again out there at Hardwood Golf Club in West Columbia. Was happening to the women, see what happened with them over the weekend in their tournament action. Dominant, to say the least. That's coming up. It's not the extra point. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. Flying solo. Terry Ford will be back in tomorrow here on The Game.
Super proud. One of our keys is always bench production. The amount of rebounds and points that they can accumulate, as well as just being able to hold serve defensively and what we want to do. Like, I have the utmost confidence in our bench. We've put them in a position to play all season long. So what they're doing right now is not a surprise. It was built that way from the very beginning, and now they're seeing just some of their patience pay off in a big way.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday afternoon here. That was, of course, Dawn Staley yesterday. After a dominant victory once again for South Carolina over UNC, 88-41, talking about the bench production for her team. And when you look at the numbers of girls coming off the bench yesterday, 51 of the 88 points South Carolina scored were via the bench. So, yes, the bench did outscore North Carolina yesterday by 10 whole points, which is not a shock, as we've seen the South Carolina bench be productive all year long. And I think the surprising thing is doing it against a team like North Carolina. Look, when we look at the Presbyterian game, that's not a shock. South Carolina beat them by 72 points earlier on in the season. You knew they were probably going to have a pretty easy time handling them once again when they faced them off on Friday. And that's not disrespect to Presbyterian Blue Hose by any means, but we just know the talent level of South Carolina is so good. And compared to a team like that, hey, good for them on making the tournament, but we knew it was not going to be an easy game by any means, and South Carolina wins that one pretty handily. What they did against North Carolina yesterday, though, was a little bit of a surprise in an absolute good way, because this is a team that South Carolina went on to play on the road earlier on in the season, their first road test, and did, I wouldn't say struggled, but did find themselves down by 11 points at one point in time. We're trailing in the second half of that game, if I remember correctly. So, it was not unreasonable to think that North Carolina could give them a little bit of a run for their money in this game yesterday. I think we all had utmost confidence South Carolina was still going to be able to pull out the win, but the way in which they did it, by just dominating from point A to point B, in that game, maybe did come as a little bit of a surprise. But nevertheless, South Carolina goes out there and plays one of its best games of the entire season, particularly when you talk about the first half of this game. Dawn Staley was asked in her post-game presser if she thought the first half against North Carolina was the best half of basketball her team's played this year.
I don't know. We haven't played like that in a super long time, and we actually were talking about that in the coaches' locker room. Like, we haven't played well all together. Like, every single one of our players made an impact coming into the game, and we needed a performance like this. And hopefully, this playing this good of a basketball can be contagious throughout the rest of the way. I thought we did a great job of just being aggressive on both sides of the basketball, just locking in to make sure that this wouldn't be our last game.
and advanced to the finals against LSU there. Sorry about that. Where, South Carolina had done what they needed to do in regards to that. So I think that truly was the best half of basketball that South Carolina has played this season. Again, 59% from the field for South Carolina, 80% from three, and then 83% from the free throw stripe, going 10 of 12 there. So, hopefully that's something to build off of. And again, I think that speaks volumes to what they were able to do in that week and a half off after putting in not a terrible performance, but a rougher couple of games against, A&M and Tennessee in the SEC women's tournament, where they, where they had the turnovers against A&M, blew the 23-point lead against Tennessee, and had to count on Camila Cardoso making that miracle three-pointer, for them to end up winning that game and playing LSU in the, in the championship game. So, this team looks like it's playing its best basketball right now, which is terrifying to the rest of the country, if we're being honest, that, South Carolina, after having an undefeated regular season, looks even better this time around, and hopefully that continues to translate, through the rest of the NCAA tournament as they turn their attention to the Sweet 16 coming up a little bit later on this week. They'll take on either Oklahoma or Indiana, who do play later on this afternoon at 6:30. You can watch that game on ESPN2 to see who is the right to face South Carolina in the Sweet 16. But again, just looking as good as ever. Fantastic performances by Malaysia Fulwiley, Chloe Kitts. Again, both those coming off the bench yesterday and putting in really good, solid numbers. And hopefully this continues going forward. And we're talking about another team making a trip to the Final Four and pursuing another national championship. Brad Mueller, of course, the voice of Gamecock women's basketball, was on the call yesterday, as he's been all season long. He joined me a little bit earlier on this morning. We chatted about what he saw this past weekend from this Gamecocks team and started looking ahead to the Sweet 16 as well. I have all that for you coming up. Replay that interview coming up next. But real quick, want to remind you once again about the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Each and every game this season, if a Gamecock hitter hits a Grand Slam, you can be the lucky recipient of a lot of money, as $25 gets added to the pot each and every game for when that Grand Slam eventually happens. You could be the lucky recipient of all that money. Just go online to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win. Pot's currently sitting at $600 as they head into this game against Presbyterian coming up tomorrow night. Pregame coverage starting at 6:15 for a 6:30 first pitch against the Blue Hose. And again, if a Gamecock hitter hits a Grand Slam, then you could win all of that money with Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Here the conversation I had with Brad Mueller. Once again, coming up next, it is the Gamecock, it's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday afternoon here on The Game. Well, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo for this Monday. Terry Ford should be back in here with me coming up tomorrow. By then, we'll know who the South Carolina women, are going to be playing in the Sweet 16, whether they be Oklahoma or Indiana. Again, they face off later on this afternoon at 6:30. You can watch that on ESPN2. I had a conversation with the voice of Gamecock women's basketball, Brad Mueller, a little bit earlier on this morning. Started off by asking if he was surprised at all by the sheer dominance they showed against North Carolina yesterday.
Yeah, I shouldn't be, but I was because of just what you said. When we played up at their place back, I think it was November 30th, Gamecocks were down by as many as 11 points, I believe, in the first half, and I think that was their first true road game of the year, and and it was a packed Carmichael gym, so I think that may have had some effect on them back in November. But North Carolina had played great in that game, the way they came out, and gave South Carolina some fits early on, but with the crowd in our favor. Yesterday, the Gamecocks came out firing, and it was great to see. Maybe it's rested legs or whatever, but they shot it like they were shooting it back in November, December, January, where they were hitting shots all over the place. And when you can, obviously South Carolina likes to get the ball inside, but when you can hit shots from the perimeter, that loosens things up and makes it easier to get it inside, as opposed to when you're not hitting from the outside, they can just pack it in. So, yeah, I was a little surprised at how the Gamecocks took control of that game early, but it was great to see, and it's just hopeful that they can take that on the road with them.
I played this cut a little bit earlier. Coach Staley in her post-game presser yesterday was asked if she thought that first half against North Carolina yesterday was the best this team has looked all season. And it's very hard to argue with that when you look at the numbers, scoring 56 points in that first half alone. Would you agree with that assessment? That's probably the best the team's looked through 20 minutes this year?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the more memorable ones, and again, just because they were just knocking down shots from everywhere, and as usual, it's not just the starters, it was the bench coming off. Malaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson were just absolutely crushing it, and it was great to see, two freshmen playing in their first NCAA tournament games to just be lighting it up like they are, which is really, really cool. So, yeah, it was one of their best shooting performances. Obviously, they did a great job defensively, too, because North Carolina's starting five is good. They've got good players. They don't have a bench, and I thought, South Carolina would eventually wear them down. I didn't expect it to be a blowout so early, but they shut down some really good players there early on. Deja Kelly, who was their top scorer, was just never a factor in the game. She came in averaging, I think, close to 17 points a game, and she was really non-existent. So kudos to the defense as well.
And talking to Brad Mueller, voice of Gamecock women's basketball, as the women's team gets set for Sweet 16 action coming up later on this week. The women's tournament is a little different than the men's, where you have roughly about a week and a half off after your respective conference tournaments before you jump in to playing that first round game. We saw now 2 weeks ago at the women's tournament that South Carolina looked as vulnerable perhaps as they had all season. You had the turnovers against Texas A&M. You had to win the game against Tennessee on that late shot by Camila Cardoso. You went back and forth with LSU in that third game. What did that week and a half off do for this team to get them to come out as dominant as they were through these first two games?
I think the biggest thing is rest. And I know every team goes through this, but when you play, 30-plus games, you start to lose your legs a little bit. You're playing a couple of games a week, then you play a conference tournament where you're doing 3 or 4 games in as many days, and it's just that grind where you just get tired. And I think I do like how the women's basketball has it set up where most of the conference tournaments around the country are done 2 weeks before the NCAA tournament starts, and you see teams come out kind of refreshed and rested. I think South Carolina took about 4 days off from practice, I think, just to let them be students for a little bit and, not have to run as much. And I think you saw that in the first couple of rounds, that they just looked refreshed. And that's what you want. You want to see the best teams playing at their best at this time of year, and you hope that can carry over into the next rounds, because, there's nothing worse than, seeing, some great teams out there as you get later in the tournament. But if they're tired and they're shooting less than 30%, it's not as much fun. But I think you're seeing that in the tournament, that you're seeing a lot of teams that are well rested, that are shooting the ball well. I watched a great game last night between Virginia Tech and Baylor that went down. It was back and forth. It was a one possession game for the entire game, and I think both those teams had their legs under them. So it was a lot of fun to watch.
You mentioned Malaysia Fulwiley just a moment ago, combined for 37 points between the two games, including scoring 20 yesterday. And look, nothing that she's done this season, I guess, has come as a surprise to any of us just because she's been that good. But when you get into these tournament settings, it's understandable for maybe some freshmen to struggle a little bit. Tessa Johnson didn't have any points against Presbyterian on Friday, rebounded with a pretty solid game yesterday against North Carolina. But, you know, for Malaysia Fulwiley, you know, and again, we still got more basketball to play, so the chapter, so the story of her freshman year is not done just yet, but how much do you take away from what she's been able to do through these first two games of the tournament to continue to add to what's already been a very impressive season?
Well, I've never had any doubt that she was going to be confident going into a game because, she hasn't looked like a freshman most of the year. The only time she looks like a freshman sometimes is when she makes some questionable fouls in the backcourt. And, I wasn't worried about her. She just has so much confidence and so much ability that, I don't even think of her as a freshman. It's a lot of fun to watch. I always like to say, she makes layups exciting, which is really fun. And she just does so many things. Her defense has gotten so much better. I think that's where the improvement has come the most, is that she's creating some offense with her defense, which is it's great that she's taking pride in that as well. And then with Tessa also, it was neat. Coach kind of joked in our pregame interview yesterday that Tessa put up a donut. She missed all 6 of her shots, I think, in the first round game against Presbyterian, but she actually graded out well because all the other things that they wanted her to do defensively and distributing the basketball and her guard in terms of who she was defending, she was perfect or near perfect. So it was great to see her hit some shots as well and get that confidence. Now it's just like any other game. You hope for them moving on.
We'll turn our attention to later on today, Oklahoma and Indiana squaring off at 6:30. That game will be televised on ESPN2. Winner of that will get South Carolina in the Sweet 16 later on this week. What can you tell us about both these teams? Do you have a preference in matchup for one over the other?
They're both pretty good. They're both nationally, top 25 teams. Indiana's a team in terms of program-wise, know a little bit more about them just because they've gotten really good in the last 5 years or so. I think this is their 5th straight NCAA tournament. In fact, last time we saw them was about 5 years ago. I want to say it was, it was the COVID year. We saw Indiana at a tournament in wherever we were in the islands in November, and that was the only team to actually beat South Carolina that year. The season ended right before the NCAA tournament. The Gamecocks won 30 games. Their only loss was to Indiana that year, and while it's all different students, they're very similar. They're very disciplined, full of good shooters, and a team that can beat you with fundamentals. I haven't seen Oklahoma play as much this year, so I think Indiana playing at home in this one will have the advantage. That's who I anticipate winning that one. But Indiana is a solid program. They've been really good the last 5 years, and can be a dangerous team. Again, different personnel, but they beat South Carolina the last time they played. 5 years ago, so it would be an interesting matchup just because they've been consistently good for 5 years, making the postseason.
All the matchups going forward will all be at neutral sites for South Carolina, as the North Carolina game yesterday was the final one at Colonial Life Arena for this 2023-2024 season, as once again South Carolina ran through obviously the entire season undefeated, but obviously once again undefeated at home for another year. When you look back and reflect on everything that you saw at home this year, what stands out to you most about what this team was able to do here in Columbia?
I just keep chuckling that this team has done what it's done, that so far it's run the table when they graduated all 5 starters. And I just laugh because, it's like even though this team has some older players on it, maybe they just don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they were supposed to, not supposed to do this. it just cracks me up that they're kind of they're a very loose bunch. While the previous group was was more businesslike on game day. This group's loose. I mean, if you get there an hour before game time and they're warming up on the floor and they're out there dancing, they're doing all kinds of different things, they're having fun, and and traditionally you'd think, oh, this team isn't ready, they're not ready to play. Well, they're ready to play, but they just have a lot of fun, and they're a lot of loose, and right now it translates to a lot of wins, so it's been a lot of fun to cover them.
Last one for you here, Brad. Again, dominant performance of the first 2 games against Presbyterian and North Carolina. You've obviously been doing this for a very long time. Can you recall a South Carolina team that outscored its opponents by 99 points through the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament?
No, because I don't think it's happened as good as the Gamecocks have been over the years. In fact, the 2017 team that won the national championship, their biggest challenge in the tournament was in the second round. They had to come from behind in the fourth quarter to beat a good Arizona State team that year. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised they blew out Presbyterian, and that's no disrespect to the folks up in Clinton, because obviously the matchup is what it is. But I was, very pleasantly surprised with what South Carolina was able to do on both ends of the floor yesterday against a really good North Carolina team, and did not expect that. I don't expect that in the rounds coming up. I just hope we score one more point than they do moving on.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully more dominance is on the docket going forward. We'll continue to check in with you through the tournament, and hopefully a good Sweet 16 game coming up later on this week. Appreciate it as always, Brad. Again, that was my conversation with Brad Muller, the voice of Gamecock women's basketball, from a little bit earlier on this morning, as they do wait to see who they'll be taking on Sweet 16 a little bit later on this week as they pursue yet another national championship. We'll come back, wrap up hour number one, get the Firehouse Subs text of the hour. That is next. It's the Halftime Show. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday on The Game. Well, welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on this Monday afternoon. Flying solo, Terry Ford should be back in here with me tomorrow. It is indeed time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. The Firehouse Subs text line. Nameless texter weighs in. Says, I have two thoughts after this weekend. The talent disparity between the top and bottom seeded women's teams is much larger than the talent disparity between the top and bottom seeded men's teams. Maybe the SEC men's basketball isn't quite up to the level that we all thought it had gotten to in terms of the conference strength as a whole compared to the rest of the country. Two good thoughts there. Kind of go in order here. Start off with the first one. You're not wrong. When you look at the difference between the men's game and the women's game, and this is just pointing out, what we can see when watching it, the best of the best are really good in women's basketball. The South Carolinas, the LSUs, Southern Cals, Texas, Iowa, obviously. The teams that have that elite talent definitely separate themselves from the rest. And the ones that are on the lower end are significantly farther behind from a talent perspective compared to the men's game, which is why you don't see nearly as many upsets or anything like that in the, in the women's bracket compared to like what we see with the, with the men's tournament, stuff like that. The women's bracket's a little more predictable, I guess is the best way to say it, to where if you just penciled in the Final Four to be a bunch of one seeds, you're probably feeling comfortable-ish about that pick when you're talking about the women's bracket, as opposed to the men's, where a lot more chaos does take place because the difference between the top overall seed and the team that comes in 64 isn't as huge of a gap between how it is on the women's side. And that's just the nature of it. It's not, something you have to love or hate. It's just kind of a fact of the game when it comes to watching women's college basketball. And in reference to the SEC, I still think, despite the struggles the SEC had, an opening weekend of the NCAA tournament, for the context of this tournament, yes, it makes the SEC look bad, but I still think it's probably the second best college basketball league in terms of men's basketball. That just happened to have a couple of its best teams not play their best basketball when it really mattered. Because if Oakland and Kentucky played 10 times, Kentucky's probably winning that game at least 8 of the times, right? They just ran into an instance where Oakland got the better of them. Same thing with Auburn and Yale. On paper, Auburn, a far better team. If they play a handful of more times, Auburn probably wins the majority of those games. They just didn't win when it really mattered. So I don't think the performance of one tournament is necessarily an indictment on the entire conference. I mean, A&M pushed a one seed in Houston to the limit last night. You still got Alabama and Tennessee alive and in the running. So the SEC is not dead yet. And, I mean, theoretically, you could get those two teams in the Final Four. It's just a couple of the teams that we thought maybe had a shot at it did get bounced in the round of 64. But I still think the SEC is very, very good from a national standpoint, especially when we talk about the talent that they have. SEC is loaded with talent across the board, much like the Big Ten, much like the Big 12. So, and look, I'm not going to put the SEC as number one. I do think it makes a strong case for being number two behind the Big 12 in terms of, overall competition and the strength of the conference on a year-in, year-out basis. This year, and from a tournament standpoint, just did not go the way the way the SEC wanted it, which, when you think about like Greg Sankey the other week making his comments about tournament expansion and stuff like that, and I can understand why he would, advocating for more of the teams in his conference to get in, because that benefits him and the conference as a whole at the end of the day. Definitely not the best performance in terms of that argument, attempting to be made just a couple of days prior. But I still think the SEC is a great basketball league. You have to look at it through more than one metric. I think the regular season and the SEC tournament, really speak volumes to how good this league is at the end of the day. Again, you just had two top level teams. And here's the thing. With the teams that made the conference or made the NCAA tournament, South Carolina was not expected to go far. Mississippi State was not expected to go far. Texas A&M was not expected to go far. Florida maybe was at least expected to get past Colorado, but regardless, not expected to go super, super far. So only a handful of teams were expected to make deep runs into the tournament. I'd say basically half of them did, and half of them are in the process of doing that in Alabama and Tennessee, and the other half aren't in Kentucky and Auburn. So again, I don't think you can put all your eggs in the basket of one tournament. Definitely didn't go the SEC's way, but still ample opportunity for the SEC to still end up hoisting a national championship when it is indeed all said and done. We'll get into football, and more football coming up in hour number 2. But as we head into this break, I have a couple pairs of tickets. Baseball taking on Presbyterian coming up tomorrow afternoon. Callers number 4 and 5 right now, 823-404-6100. Each win yourself a pair of tickets to go see South Carolina baseball taking on Presbyterian out at Founders Park. Football coming up in hour number 2. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday here on The Game. Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo with you on this Monday. Terry Ford should be back in tomorrow, at least as far as I know. Sometimes I'm surprised by it, but he should be back tomorrow. It is the 1 o'clock hour, time for football, and more football as we move into week number 2 of spring practice for the Gamecocks. Spring game now just under a month away on April the 20th, which we did find out the other day would be yet another nighttime 7 o'clock kick. So it'd be cool to see him under the lights on what hopefully is a nice April evening, a little over a month from now. And when we get to that game, the hope would be you have a little bit of an idea of what the depth chart's going to look like, because this offseason had so much turnover that you're going to see so many new faces in new starting roles on the offense, which that's kind of become the norm of college football with transfers and obviously freshmen and all that kind of stuff coming in at such a high volume on a year in, year out basis. You stand to see your team look vastly different from from year to year. Now, of course, the biggest position battle that we're all paying attention to is quarterback, most important position on the field, no duh, with Lenora Sellers and Robbie Ashford seemingly being the two guys truly going at it. Now, yeah, as Beamer said before, it's an open competition. That means Davis Bevel, guys like that, even Luke Doty, still having a shot at being starting quarterback, but Lenora Sellers definitely a couple steps ahead of everybody else in terms of winning that job. Of course, he took the first snap of spring practice last week, but since then has been an open competition, as we've talked about so much with with Robbie Ashford being such a almost the exact same play style as Lenora Sellers. He's going to come in and compete for sure, but he's going to have to be head and shoulders better than Sellers in a lot of categories, I feel like, to win himself that starting job, because Sellers is in a position to get the benefit of the doubt. He's been here already. He's learned this offense. He's had this relationship with Dow Loggins for over a year now, to where they're on the same page and kind of understand the nuances of what each other is doing. So that obviously gives him the inside track into winning the job. Now, if he doesn't win the job, that means that Robbie Ashford's better. And again, it would probably need for him to be significantly better to end up beating out Lenora Sellers. So that's something that, I imagine Sellers will probably be, on the whatever team we deem as the starters when the spring game rolls around. But this seems like one of those competitions that's not going to truly be decided until you get maybe all the way down to game number 1 against Old Dominion, which there's, as much as we may not enjoy playing cupcakes, that's not disrespect to the Monarchs, my apologies. There is a benefit of having a game like that in week number 1 sometimes, especially if you're trying to figure out your quarterback position. Because what you can do, theoretically, as long as you change your business, you can play Sellers in one half, you can play Ashford in the other half, or most of the second half, or whatever it may be, to give you one last look at them in a live game situation, as opposed to just scrimmaging in practice over and over and over again. There are some guys, and I know Dow Loggins talked about this last week from his time at Arkansas when he was a player the first time around, that there was, guys in the quarterback room that just didn't practice well. But you put them out there on the actual field against an opponent, and they play great. So, again, I feel like this is one of those things that we may still be working through a little bit as the season starts. But again, Lenore Sellers gets the nod, at least up to this point. And, we'll see what the conversation about his progression is throughout the spring, as they are tailor-making this offense around him from every indication that we've been given, which is the smart thing to do. I mean, that's what Dow Loggins did with Spencer Rattler a season ago when he came in, was, hey, we're going to take our best player, and we're going to make the offense work to his skill set and his abilities. And, the same thing can be done with, with Lenora Sellers here in his sophomore year. And then, Robbie Ashford. The ideal scenario with Robbie Ashford, he comes in as a backup. Lenore Sellers goes out there and balls out. And then Ashford plays in some garbage time, all that kind of stuff. Never has to take a meaningful snap. That's the objective, right? When you name someone a starter and when you name someone a backup, the anticipation is that the backup should not have to play a meaningful snap all year. Now, yes, injuries do happen. So that's always something you got to keep in mind, especially with a running type of quarterback. But for Ashford, you would hope, all right, comes in, he's backup to Sellers in case we need him, in case of emergency, break glass type quarterback. But the hope would be that when the season ends, he's never played a meaningful snap. Not to say they can't play garbage time and stuff like that. That's fine. But the Sellers was so good, you didn't have to turn to Robbie Ashford at any point, during a competitive game. And then if he decides to move on after that, that's up to him. I think he still has eligibility after this year, so maybe he has an option to go somewhere else too. But the objective would be for him to not have any meaningful snaps this season, and that Sellers truly takes the reins, as we have a lot of confidence that he's going to be able to do. Outside of that, obviously you are looking at the running back spot where Rocket Sanders is injured. Likely won't be doing a whole lot this spring, but that's okay. He's somebody that has been there and done that and already proved himself at the SEC level, to where if he doesn't, suit up until or do anything significant until the first game of the season, I think you'd feel okay with it. He might be worried about rust and just not having played a whole lot over the past couple of seasons due to his injury, but if he goes out there and is 100% healthy by the time the season rolls around, we feel pretty confident saying that South Carolina's running back room is going to be a good spot. In addition to Oscar Attaway, who will theoretically be taking the bulk of the carries, it sounds like, with Rocket Sanders being injured for the time being. Jordan Howell, who, again, showed out in his time down at South Carolina State in his 1 year there. And then, what do you do about the other guys, the guys that have been here for a while with, Juju McDowell returning from his collarbone injury, as well as, a guy like DJ Braswell coming into his second year. In addition to Michael Fuller coming as a true freshman. So a lot of options, a lot of bodies in the room, which that at the day is the end-all be-all most important thing to me, is that you have a room full of legitimate running backs, which is something you did not say a year ago. Remember, this is the time a year ago where we found out, all right, they're going to move DK over to running back. It's just for the spring. It's just until they can go get somebody in the transfer portal or whatever the conversation was. And then, as spring turned to summer and summer turned to fall, guess what? Kerryon Joyner's still in the running back room because they did not get anybody else outside of Mario Anderson, who I believe was already on campus, for spring practice a season ago. So at least this time around, you address that in the early, transfer portal period back in December to January, to where you're not having to worry about that anymore. And Marquell Blackwell taking over a very talented running back room, and we will see what he gets out of it. And in addition to what Sean Elliott adds as the new run game coordinator here at South Carolina, and what he's able to do with the talent that he's going to be given here, here with the Gamecocks. Elsewhere, wide receiver is probably the largest question mark as far as offensive positions go. Just because you have a litany of talented guys, but you don't really know which way it's going to be divided up. Because this is a room that lost a lot of production from a season ago, where, of course, X, who's getting set to be drafted here in about a month's time, as well as Juice Wells, no longer with the team. And yes, Juice did not play this past season, but theoretically, had he been coming back for this year, which, remember back to his original tweet, we thought he was. He kind of duped us on that one, but had he been returning this season, he would have felt very good and very confident about him being your number one. As of right now, that number one's not been established. It can be Nick Harbor. Of course, he's running track right now, setting records, by the way. Yeah, saw that he just did one the other day. But, he's somebody that's still developing as a receiver, still coming along in a few areas, getting more crisp with route running, that kind of stuff. That a spring practice, a month worth of practices could have done him some good in that regard. But look, he's a special circumstance. We understand it's either let him run track here or don't have him at all. So you'll take the trade-off. Hopefully the time that he does get with the team can lead to good development to put him in a good position when the fall rolls around, because he's got the size for it. He's the type of guy that you'd love to line up on the outside and throw high-pointed balls to, but there's no guarantee on that at the moment. Now, you do have other talented guys in the wide receiver room. Larvadain, Huggins Bruce, Jared Brown, all very similar style type of guys, similar stature. We just don't exactly know the way these guys are going to be divvied up as of right now, which, again, is kind of, in some ways, the beauty of what the transfer portal is, where you can rebuild an entire room and not know what you have, and they turn out to all be superstars. On the flip side of things, they can all turn out to be duds too. So you can never be 100% confident in it. You just have to wait and see it play out on the field ultimately at the end of the day. And then offensive line, just hope you can piece it together and stay healthy. That's all I'll say is 5 guys out of 16 scholarship guys. It's got to work out some kind of way. And when it does, just again, hope they can stay healthy and not have any issues like we had a season ago. And that will satisfy pretty much everyone. So again, these are things that we're trying to learn this spring, if we can learn them at all. I know Coach Beamer will be talking tomorrow. I don't believe any media has open availability to practice this week, but we will see what we can glean from Coach Beamer, see if anybody's made any progress, so far through just a week, just a couple days of practice. So maybe not a whole lot to glean from it, but you should see and hear what Coach Beamer has to say coming up tomorrow, which we should be carrying for you right here on the game at 12:30. Continue on with football, and more football. Clemson last week launches the lawsuit against the ACC. ACC countersued at the end of the week. What does this mean going forward, and what happens if Clemson does manage to escape the ACC? Florida State as well. We'll dive into all those questions coming up. It is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head with you on your Monday on the game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head with you on this Monday. Flying solo. It is football, and more football here, as always, in the 1 o'clock hour. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about Clemson and the ACC and this relationship that continues to heat up in the wrong way between the two, as the Clemson launched a lawsuit at the ACC trying to get out of the ironclad grant of rights agreement that is locked in until 2036. At the end of last week, the ACC, not backing down, launched a countersuit back at Clemson in regards to them trying to exit the conference through legal means. This story is far from over. It's something we're going to continue to follow for weeks, months, years, however long this ends up taking, because this is not going to be a swift overnight process. And, you know, while we're still waiting on the latest update on the legal proceedings of this, which, again, things in court don't move very fast, I was reading Dennis Dodd, writes for CBS Sports, kind of his, his thoughts on this, and he brings up a really good question. And it's actually the title of his article on CBSSports.com. And then what? Plans for Florida State Clemson remain unclear if rivals successfully exit the ACC. So, first of all, getting out of the ACC is not going to be easy. It's getting this ironclad grant of rights deal, this enormous exit fee you would have to pay to the conference. It's not going to be a walk in the park, which is why they're trying to go the legal route to avoid having to pay these exit fees and all this kind of stuff. I don't think they're going to be able to. And the ACC is putting its foot down, standing its ground, and not really budging on anything, nor should they. But let's play devil's advocate here. Let's say Clemson and Florida State do get the opportunity to leave the ACC. They successfully sue them, whatever the means of doing that is, to where they can now go elsewhere. Typically, when teams go to a new conference, it is a long conversation process, at least when it's done right, before it's announced, and the transition is something that happens over a period of time. Texas and Oklahoma were announced to the SEC a couple of seasons ago, a couple of years ago, 2021, I guess, 2022. So 2 years ago, 2 full calendar years before A&M or before Texas and Oklahoma were actually joining the SEC, which still hasn't happened yet. It'll happen this summer. That was announced. Same thing with Southern Cal and UCLA going to the Big Ten. Now, by circumstance, with the Pac-12 falling apart, a lot of conferences, a lot of teams that were jumping off the ship there moved very quickly, but that's not the norm when it comes to teams changing conferences. And for the ACC and Florida State as well, remember, they're still embroiled in this legal proceeding with the ACC of trying to get out. Let's say they do get out. Then what happens? Because Dennis Dodd points out something very specific here in his article. He says, both schools must officially leave the ACC before talks can begin with another conference. If not, get familiar with the phrase coitus interference, which is a fancy legal term for tampering. You can bet ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips has warned his Power 4 peers to lay off illegal pursuits. So if Clemson and Florida State get their wish and can leave the ACC, well, they don't know for sure that they have a landing spot. I think we've talked about it quite a bit, that the Power 2 conferences that everybody wants to join in the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be very selective on what they do and really assess what kind of value you bring to the table. As we talked about, I think the SEC would be more in line to, to want to go to a North Carolina or Virginia to open up a new state and a new market that it does not already exist in. Same thing with the Big Ten. The Big Ten also has the academic standards of research institutions that Clemson and Florida State do not match, to my knowledge. So if these two schools successfully exit the ACC, they can't guarantee they're going to have a landing spot. Now, I do think the Big 12 would be more in line to open them with open arms, because that's a conference that lacks huge brand identity now that Texas and Oklahoma have left. You got Oklahoma State. Yeah, sure, I guess. BYU. Yeah, fine, I suppose. Colorado, sure. I mean, Deion is obviously going to grab some headlines, but as far as like true brand identity of college football, your two biggest proponents of that left, have gone to the SEC. So I feel like Brett Yormark would happily welcome in Clemson and Florida State. Now, the difference in that is you're, at this point in time with their current TV deal, you've been making less going to the Big 12. Now, Big 12 does not have a locked-in grant of rights until 2036. I believe their TV deal expires in 2031, so there's the potential of making more money with a restructured TV deal in the Big 12 than sticking status quo with what you've got in the ACC now until 2036. So again, I don't know where this goes. I don't know if either school has truly thought that far ahead yet, because just getting out of the conference is such a huge undertaking that I don't have confidence they're going to be able to do it, to be honest with you. Especially not skirting that exit fee. And the ACC would still hold the rights to their television broadcast. So that creates a whole nother mess. And I understand why they're trying to get out, because the money's not there. For two programs that have won national championships and been in the college football playoff in the past 10 years, they feel like they don't get the value they deserve. Now, unfortunately, again, I think already existing in states with SEC programs in South Carolina and Florida hurts them, because they're not offering as much to the table for their new conference, for a theoretical new conference, as many other teams would. Now, you can make the argument, oh, well, Texas was already in the state with Texas A&M. Texas is a big state. Austin is legitimately one of the most populated cities in the entire country. Texas itself is such a big brand that regardless if there's another team in the state in the SEC, I think that trumps everything. Can't really say the same thing for Clemson or Florida State. Both good brands, but I think they pale in comparison to what like a Texas is at this point in time. And I see the value Texas brought to the SEC when it came in. Same thing with Oklahoma. That I just don't know if Clemson and Florida State can meet those, meet that same requirement. But it's going to be a long legal battle. There's going to be a lot of money spent before anybody even attempts to exit the league. Even if they do, maybe go be independent. Maybe you go join the Pac Mountain West. They're looking for members, right? I mean, we're pretty much lawless when it comes to realignment anyway. We got Stanford and Cal playing in the ACC. A little bit closer to the Pacific Ocean. You got SMU paying to become part of the ACC. So I guess it's not unrealistic to think that Clemson and Florida State could play West Coast teams in conference. Who knows? But this isn't over yet. It's got a long battle ahead of them. And if I had to bet right now, which I'm not a betting person, but I would bet the ACC wins this one. So we'll see what happens. We'll continue on with football, and more football. NFL proposing rule changes for the upcoming season. Optimism? Sure. Dumb? Every year. We'll dive into some of those coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on the game. Well, welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head with you on this Monday afternoon. Flying solo here. Elijah Campbell jump in here with me in the 2 o'clock hour. Have plenty to talk about coming up then. I want to jump to the NFL as football, and more football rolls on. The NFL Competition Committee has approved, or a couple of rule changes were on the table for this spring. I want to focus on two. The NFL Competition Committee has approved one of them, and one is still yet to be voted on. So we'll start off with the one that has been approved by the Competition Committee, that being eliminating the hip drop tackle, which is something that we've seen a lot of over the course of last season especially, and it is a tackling style that can lead to injuries because you're essentially, for those that are not familiar, it's really a process of bringing the ball carrier backwards, a lot of times mangling legs and stuff like that. So it can be pretty nasty looking. Whether defensive players are intentionally doing this or not is debatable. Sometimes that's just how the tackle goes. But regardless, the Competition Committee has amended Rule 12, Section 2 to eliminate a potentially dangerous tackling technique. It is a foul if a player uses the following technique to bring a runner to the ground: grabs runner with both hands or wraps the runner with both arms and unweights himself by swiveling and dropping hips in her lower body, landing on and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. So, and that will result in a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. So, again, I get the principle of the rule and what they are trying to do. My problem is we are further handcuffing defensive players in the NFL. I really don't know how these guys play defense with so many rules levied against them. And, the NFL is trying to make the game exciting, and offense is more exciting than defense more often than not. But these rules are tilted so heavily in the offense's favor now. I thought the roughing the passer rule a couple years ago that we still see rear its ugly head every now and again was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, where this judgment of if you put your body weight on the quarterback when you bring him to the ground can result in a penalty, which we've seen called very, very poorly over the years in the NFL. Now you are, and look, again, I'll say this, as I've said many times before, I don't believe that officials are out to get a team. I don't believe officials are trying to make one team win and make one team lose. I just think NFL officials especially are really bad at their jobs and make terrible calls in every single game, some of which affect the outcome of the game. And so you are now putting another call like this into their hands where, and again, are there some guys that make hip drop tackles intentionally? Sure. Is it every single one? No. Sometimes just the process of how you catch someone and how your body falls can look like an egregious hip drop tackle without any intent to do so. But now it's going to be a 15-yard penalty. I heard Preston talking about this morning, like as a defensive lineman, he says, I can't hit them high, I can't hit them low, I can't drag them down from behind. What am I supposed to do? I really don't know. And again, it's more of a handcuff on these defensive players as they are trying to make these tackles. So, but there's another 15-yard penalty and automatic first down to add to the repertoire of so many that already exist in the NFL. So there's that rule that did get approved. The other rule that has a lot of people talking, that was not voted on today but could be voted on as soon as tomorrow, revolves around the kickoff. Now, the kickoff in the NFL has long been just a nothing play. I mean, we're a long time removed from the days of Devin Hester and so forth, where you could count on multiple returns a game and, hey, he was probably going to take one to the house. Nowadays, when you actually get a kickoff return, it is such a rare sight. But the NFL, and look, I'll give them credit. I never thought the NFL was going to look at what is deemed a developmental league and say, hey, I like that rule, we should use it. Because that's essentially what they're doing by adopting a XFL style kickoff rule, or attempting to at least. It's being proposed. For those that never watched the XFL, you essentially had the kicker position where he normally is. I want to say it was at the 30 or 35 in the XFL. Then on the other end of the field, you have a return man back by himself. In front of him, I want to say the 25-yard line in the XFL, you had the 10 other guys on the return team lined up side by side across the field. And then 5-10 yards apart from them was the other 10 guys outside of the kicker on the kicking team. And the thought process behind this was it encourages kickoff returns without having one team just sprinting full speed down the field, which leads to injuries and all that kind of stuff. I get it. The NFL is proposing something very similar, but not 100% the exact same. So I'll read through these rules real quick. You got the kicker by himself, kicking from the 35. He won't be able to cross midfield until the ball's in play. Ball will be in play once the returner catches it, or if the ball hits the ground in the landing zone, or the ball gets in the end zone. Again, coverage teams will be lined up together. The kicking team will sit at the 40-yard line of the return team. And then you have the receiving team 5 yards apart at 35. And then you have this landing zone area behind them, which will be where the return person is. Which you can also have multiple returners, so that's good at least. And again, the idea is to encourage more kickoff returns while being safe about it, which is good. I feel like, though, still kicking off from the 35 is probably... I feel like maybe moving it back to the 30, that way you're truly encouraging actual kickoff returns, because these NFL kickers have cannons for legs, right? So I feel like you're still going to have a fair amount of touchbacks. But I like they're at least trying something. Because it was very disheartening that we just kind of keep going through season after season of this play being there but not really actually mattering. One of the executives in the NFL referred to it as a dead ceremonial play around Super Bowl week, so that kind of told you that change was probably coming to it. So I'm glad they're at least trying something. There's more to this rule that I forgot about here. You have this landing zone. It's between the goal line and the 20-yard line. The kickoff and coverage teams can't move until the ball gets into the landing zone. It's been fielded by a returner or touches the ground. There's also no fair catches anymore, which is something that had been approved. I believe it was this past year. And then here's the big one. If the kickoff doesn't make it past the 20-yard line, the ball is considered out of bounds, and the return team will get the possession at its own 40, similar to a legal motion or a legal kick out of bounds on a kickoff, like where it goes out and you get a 35. Same thing if the kick does go out of bounds. And then touchback would be on the 30-yard line if the ball is kicked in the end zone on the fly and the receiving team gets touchback at its own 30. Touchback on the 20-yard line if the ball hits the ground in the landing zone and then rolls into the end zone and doesn't get returned. The touchback would only go out to the 20. So, again, there's a lot of mechanics and moving parts to this that is kind of hard to keep up with, at least initially. I imagine some kind of approval on this is going to come because the kickoff needs to be tweaked. It needs to still be a part of the game. But according to Rich McKay, the competition committee, they're going to move the vote to tomorrow, and it could also be shelved until owners' meetings a little bit later on. But I imagine something along these lines would be, would be brought in for the 2024 season. Another part of this as well, maybe something people aren't thinking about as much, but you have to declare onside kicks, which completely takes the element of surprise out of it. Think back to Sean Payton in the Super Bowl against the Colts where he on-kicked the second half kickoff, and that was huge for the momentum of the Saints that went on to win that game. So now you have to declare if you're kicking an onside kick, so there's no more element of surprise. But again, the competition committee, the owners, the teams have to vote on this. But again, if I had to bet, I would imagine they're probably going to approve something along these lines to spice up the kickoff a little bit more because it's been so very dull over these past however many years since they moved the kickoff up to discourage run backs. So hopefully they can do something with this and make it a little bit more interesting. We'll come back, wrap up hour number 2, get you another Firehouse Subs text of the hour as we roll along here on the Halftime Show. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head with you. Wrapping up hour number 2. It is indeed time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. And outside the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Dave weighs in and says, if you told me last week the women's basketball team would score twice as many points as their opponents in the NCAA's first 2 rounds, I would have believed that was possible. If you would have told me Gamecock baseball would score almost 3 times as many runs as third-rate Vandy, I would have said you were crazy. Gamecocks baseball's worst game was twice Vanderbilt's score. Nice weekend for South Carolina. You're absolutely right. And we're going to get a little bit more into Gamecock baseball coming up in the final hour of the show. But, you know, with the women, you expect this kind of dominance. Like, yeah, maybe North Carolina was going to push them a little bit more, but I don't think any of us thought that North Carolina was actually going to win the game. And South Carolina just went out there and played their best half of basketball in that first half and just truly, truly dominated the Tar Heels to get themselves to the Sweet 16 once again. But baseball, man, I was worried. I really was. When you look at how last weekend went against Ole Miss, you lose the first 2 games. Yeah, you were able to rebound and get that third win, but still you lost the series, which at the end of the day, the series is the most important thing. Win the series, whether you sweep or only get 2, just win the series, and you'll be fine. So to go on the road, and yes, every road team lost, last weekend in the SEC, as far as the overall series goes. So going on the road in your first series of conference play and losing the first 2 games is something that was concerning. As I mentioned, rebounded with the game on Sunday, but you still lost the series. And to be looking at the task that lied ahead, welcoming in number 3 Vanderbilt, a team that was hitting the cover off the baseball this year. One of the best hitting teams, offensive teams in all of college baseball. It concerns you. It concerned me because I looked at this and said, man, if South Carolina loses its second straight series to start off conference play, and then you roll into a short week on the road at Tuscaloosa, and if you were to drop that one too, and suddenly you're 0-3 in series to start out the year, now you're in trouble. It's the classic case of you can't win the SEC in March, but you can certainly lose it. And dropping 3 straight series to open up the season would be a way to lose it. But thankfully, South Carolina went out there, played their butts off over the weekend against, again, what was at the time was the number 3 team in the country. They've now dropped down to number 7, but South Carolina made them look pedestrian because they dominated them in every facet of the game. You know, the offense was not consistent against Ole Miss the week before. Particularly when we talk about guys at the top of the lineup, that Friday game at Ole Miss, they couldn't get a hit to save their lives. A lot more consistent this time around. Cole Messina, 4 RBIs and a home run. Ethan Petrie, 6 RBIs, 2 home runs. Kennedy Jones brought in a couple of RBIs with a home run himself. Parker Nolan against his old team gets an RBI in the second game. And just on and on and on. You can go up and down the list of what everybody was able to accomplish over the weekend. And it just, makes you feel a lot better about where this team is coming away from this weekend compared to last. That's pointing out the obvious. But it was a big step in the right direction. And from a pitching standpoint, you couldn't help but be impressed with what they did, particularly from a starting pitching role. With Eli Jones having a no-hitter through 6 innings in Game 1 on Saturday. SQ, he did fine. He only ended up going 3 innings, but he could have gone longer. He wasn't in dire trouble when they ended up pulling him and putting Ty Good in. And then Tyler Pitzer, true freshman, comes in, pitches lights out in 6 1/3. Had a no-hitter himself going through a handful of innings before finally surrendering one. Doesn't allow an earned run. 9 strikeouts. And he might have earned himself the third weekend starter role because that's been TBD through the first couple of weeks of the season for the most part. And that speaks to the volume of depth that South Carolina has at its at pitcher, because you have the opportunity saying, okay, well, depending on how these first 2 games shake out, we'll see what options we have for Sunday. And in this case, it ended up being Pitzer getting the opportunity to start and went out there and did phenomenal. So hats off to him. Hats off to this entire team as they roll a big wave of momentum, getting set to go to Tuscaloosa again for a Thursday through Saturday matchup because Easter's next Sunday, and looking to win yet another SEC series to continue on this swing of momentum that they've had going all the way back to last Sunday against Ole Miss. We'll dive more into baseball. We'll get some of Coach Kingston's thoughts as well coming up in the last hour of the halftime show. Elijah Campbell going to jump here with me as well. We'll get some of his thoughts on what he saw on the Hardwood this weekend as well. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head with you going until 3. Terry Ford, I think, is going to be back tomorrow. We'll see. He hasn't told me anything past today, but we'll see what happens with that. But again, hour number 3 coming up. Dive more into baseball. Elijah Campbell jumping here with me as well here on the halftime show on the game. 2 o'clock, welcome back in. It is the halftime show here on the game. Tyler Head, now joined in studio by the one and only Elijah Campbell as we jump into the 2 o'clock hour. The headlines for 2 o'clock, and I just wrapped up the last hour talking about baseball. I think that's a perfect place to start headline-wise as D1 Baseball updated its rankings earlier on this morning. South Carolina goes from being not ranked last weekend after the loss to Ole Miss, or the series loss to Ole Miss, to number 18, while Vanderbilt, who came in as number 3 in the country this past weekend, falls to number 7. So great weekend all around on the diamond for Gamecock baseball.
That's right. Yeah, their hiatus from the top 25 did not last very long. But you know what? Sweeping the number 3 team in the country, doing so pretty convincingly, is a good way to announce yourself as a league contender back to the country.
I brought this up a few minutes ago. I was legitimately worried coming in this past weekend because you go on the road to Oxford, and yes, and Kinks has brought this up several times, every team lost on the road last weekend as far as the overall series goes in the SEC, because every environment in the SEC is tough to play. That's not news. Everybody knows that. So you drop the series against Ole Miss out there in Oxford, and then you're welcoming in a Vanderbilt team, one of the best hitting teams in the country. Everybody in that starting 9, with the exception of one, was hitting over 300. It worried you, and rightfully so. And it's like, okay, well, don't get swept, right? You know what I mean? Like, even if you lose the series, at least try and win one game. That way you're not, limping out of another weekend. But they go in there, and they sweep them. They look incredible on offense, incredible pitching. And now you have this surge of momentum as you head into another tough environment this upcoming weekend, taking on Alabama, who they themselves just got beat out in Athens this past weekend against Georgia at number 16 in the latest D1 baseball poll. But the SEC is not easy, and you would have been looking at a must-win series coming up this weekend if you dropped this one to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, it would have been really concerning. I think the thing about the Vanderbilt series this past weekend was it was a good chance to really, really learn, what you have in a series where you're not, on paper expected to win it, but there's a lot of implication of standings and just an opportunity to really show what you're worth against a top 3 opponent at home. And you mentioned the success that no one had on the road in the first weekend. There are some teams that had some road success this weekend.
Right.
LSU dropped a series at home to Florida in a top 6 series between 2 teams in the top 6. So, I mean, that's not slipping up and then winning those games, not making the mistakes Vanderbilt made, being able to take advantage of those mistakes and being able to show visible improvement is got to be incredibly encouraging. All the sweep aside, because that's
Sure,
you want to sweep a team like that, but you were able to answer a lot of the questions that you've had so far this year in terms of pitching and situational hitting. I think you did, those a hell of a lot better than you did earlier in the season.
And you mentioned, the mistakes Vanderbilt made. They played a very uncharacteristic weekend of baseball, just from a fielding standpoint, with all the errors that they made. That's not something you see typically out of Vanderbilt. But even if you eliminate those errors, South Carolina still probably wins all 3 of these games. It's not like they were decided by 1 run. These are pretty convincing wins at the end of the day, which again, goes a long way into saying what this team was able to do against a top 3 team in Vanderbilt.
And I think my favorite thing that you probably learned this weekend is, maybe you have a good Sunday starter in Pitzer. I mean, Tyler Pitzer had a hell of a week. And I think yesterday being able to go 6 1/3 and strike out 9 and have easily the best performance of any of your starters this weekend has got to be one of the biggest additions you can take away from this weekend.
And we'll hear a little bit from Coach Kingston here, because Tyler Pitzer is a freshman.
Yeah.
And you
SEC Freshman of the Week.
You tasked him with starting against the number 3 team in the nation in his first ever collegiate start. Here is Coach Kingston talking about having confidence in starting a freshman in that role.
I think number one, you have to sign and recruit talented players that have the ability to do that. But then you also have to show confidence in them when you feel like they're ready. And I think it's really important that the coaches figure out the right time to give them their opportunity so that they are set up for success. I think Pitzer had earned it through the fall. We just saw a lot of growth from the fall into the spring and now in the real games, and just felt like it was the right time to give him that opportunity. And so when we give the opportunities to guys, you want to see them run with it, and you saw an example today of a guy that really ran with it. And then Becker again was outstanding coming out of the bullpen.
And he had come out, or Pitzer had come out of the bullpen in all of his prior appearances earlier on this season, had never thrown more than 3 innings, which he did against Belmont a couple of weekends back. Only had 1 earned run going into yesterday, and didn't surrender any either. So, did enough to earn that opportunity to get that start, which, again, I think speaks volumes to the depth of your pitching staff as a whole, where you have these options and being able to say, okay, well, we have 2 or 3 guys that we could theoretically start on Sunday. We'll see how games 1 and 2 go and see what we have left when Sunday rolls around, because Becker can be a starter, Kimball can be a starter. We saw Ty Good get a start the other weekend. Like, you have options, and Pitzer, I mean, for this point in time, I don't see why you wouldn't name him as your – it's not going to be Sunday this weekend. It's going to be your 3rd game starter against Alabama on Saturday.
It affords you some flexibility that maybe not a lot of other teams in this conference have. You could be able to, determine matchups and be able to look at the opposing team's lineup and be able to look at the 3 players or pitchers that you can put in that spot, 3 or 4 pitchers that you can put in that spot as a starter on that 3rd game of the weekend, and really be able to find matchups that you like. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from the entire weekend, is just that you've discovered you have another arm that you can trust in a weekend series to be able to take you deep into a game and to be able to strike guys out at a high rate and not make the mistakes in the strike zone that lead to, putting runners on.
Speaking of arms you can rely on, I am anointing myself the president of the Garrett Gainey fan club.
Oh, my God. That guy was awesome.
This dude is lights out. Like, he is everything that you want in a closer. Pitches in both games on Saturday. Comes out there, doesn't allow a hit in either one, no runs allowed, total of 4 strikeouts between the 2 appearances. And you got to appreciate the Scarface machine gun coming off of the mound.
Oh, that's very Kenny Powers-esque.
Yeah, I think that was after the 2nd game. Like, this dude, he's a character. I like him a lot.
I love watching him strike people out because he will lose his mind on the mound, and it is so much fun to watch.
Here's the thing. Like, pitchers can be head cases, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
It's all mental. And that can be a detriment to some guys, but to some guys, that can be their biggest asset. When you have a guy like that maybe is a little bit of a loose cannon inside of his own mind, as long as it translates to good pitching, I don't care what you do.
Hey, that means, like, sometimes being a loose cannon in that situation means you're just not going to be afraid of any moment you get into. And this weekend, he faced 2 bases-loaded jams with 2 outs and got them out of both. That's awesome. That's what you want in a relief pitcher, especially a closer, is somebody who, when you can get into some trouble, you can rely on that guy who's not going to have any fear of the moment, who's not going to have, even against lefties, I still like him in those situations, or against righties, I still like him in those situations. It's you got something there. And I think that might be the entire strength of the bullpen, is that you have a guy that you can throw out there in those situations, and he will shut it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he's only given up the 1 earned run so far this year, that being that home run to Clemson. And when he had pitched several good innings before that, you just give up the 1 home run. But
his only mistake all year.
Exactly.
The only blemish ended a game.
Exactly. The only blemish, the blemish that he has so far. And we say all this about pitchers. And Eli Jones, by the way, had 6 scoreless innings, or 6 no-hit innings on Saturday before finally giving up that first hit in the top of the 7th there. But we're saying all this. I think we need to give credit where it's due to Matt Williams, the new pitching coach, who Coach Kingston was very high on and said he's got somebody that he had his eyes on for several years. When the opportunity to bring him in came about, he did. And again, through the 24 games they played so far, this pitching staff's been incredible.
It has. It went from question mark to something that they can truly rely on. I think the bullpen's done a really good job at times this year, especially in middle relief, which is probably the most underrated element of the entire sport, is being able to find the gap between starting pitcher and closer. I think they've done a really good job of situational pitching. The revelation of Garrett Gainey being a lights-out closer, also really cool. And then now you have some flexibility in the back end of your starting rotation. That's a formula of success. And I know it's early on right now, but you look at the standings. I mean, you're tied for 2nd in the SEC East, and you're about tied for, 3rd, I guess, in the entire SEC. But it's early, so a lot can happen. But if you want to look at your roster right now and say, is this sustainable? Is this something that we can sustain throughout the entire conference season? If you have your pitching in order with the lineup that they already have, then I feel like it's not unrealistic to say you can hang around where you're at right now for an entire season.
No, absolutely. And again, just getting this first series win out of the way in the SEC in week number 2 certainly goes a long way. And again, each and every week is going to be tough, and anybody can win on any weekend in the SEC. So you take as many of these as you can get. And again, going on the road to Alabama this weekend, not going to be easy by any means, but you have confidence that this team, if they continue to play the way that they did this past weekend, can certainly get it done. And the top of the lineup performed really well this past weekend as well, which is something that was a struggle for them on the road at Oxford the other weekend, where you didn't have production, consistently through your 1 through 5, which again affects the pretty much the entire 1 through 9 at that point in time. But Messina and Petrie being your 2 preseason All-Americans, those guys stepped up in a big way, combined for 10 of the 26 RBIs on the weekend, 3 home runs between those guys. When they're playing well, the rest of the offense falls in line. Yeah, having someone in Ethan Petrie, too, I think I tallied it up 5 for 8 on the weekend, 6 RBI, 5 walks, 2 home runs. He's playing a video game out there at times, and he can hit him anywhere. He's either he can pull it, he can hit it opposite field, like he did. I think it was in the second game or second or third game. Second game, yeah, his second home run I think was opposite field. I mean, that's. If you want to talk about reliability, Ethan Petrie is one of the most reliable hitters in the entire league, and when Cole Messina's raking like that too, you're going to do a whole lot better at not leaving men on base with those guys. Ethan Petrie almost won somebody a whole lot of money as well if the wind hadn't been blowing in. That's right. If he hit to any other part of the park, if the wind was just blowing at a different angle, that's probably being carried out. Somebody could have won some money and had a really fun Monday. I was going to say the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway is starting to gain a lot of steam as we're into the $600 range now. As more and more games go by. Ooh. That's a good chunk of change. $600 can do a lot for you. Absolutely. I would love to have it. We're not allowed to enter, unfortunately. But if you go online to 1075thegame.com each and every week and enter for your chance to win, because, hey, they're taking on Presbyterian tomorrow night. The Grand Slam could come then. It could come against Alabama this weekend. Regardless, you want to make sure you are registered, because when that Grand Slam happens, you could be the lucky winner. Because, I'm not a mathematician, Tyler, but I do know your chances of winning are a roughly 0% if you don't enter. You miss 100% of the shots you never take. Exactly. And that's we have, I think, established as a fundamental law of percentages. You cannot have a % chance of winning if you don't enter. That's right. So, again, Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway on 1075thegame.com. We'll continue on with the halftime show, get some of Elijah's thoughts on what happened this weekend on the Hardwood, because there was quite a bit that went down between the men and the women. That's coming up. It's halftime show. He's Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head. Going until 3 here on the game.
We really wanted to win today. I wanted to go to Dallas really bad. All the guys wanted to go to Dallas really bad, but I told them in the locker room the thing I wanted the most really was to see everyone at practice on Monday. That's the thing I'm going to miss the most, is just seeing my guys every single day.
Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head and Elijah Campbell along with you going up until 3. That was the voice of the man that captivated America's hearts on Thursday with his ridiculous amount of three-point shots. Jack Golke of the Oakland Golden Grizzlies. Of course, they defeated Kentucky in round number 1, played a thrilling overtime game against North Carolina State on Saturday. Unfortunately, that spelled the end for the Golden Grizzlies in their Cinderella run. Can you call it Cinderella if it's only one game?
Not a run as much as it was a light jog, a good Cinderella jog.
That's fair. They made a statement, a huge statement that's going to be remembered forever, and Jack Golke's going to be at the forefront of that. But, yeah, unfortunately come up a little bit short. Though I feel like watching that game between them and North Carolina State, as a nation, I don't think we could lose with that one, because you either had the Cinderella story or you had the scrappy, unbelievable turnaround of a team that's won 7 games in 12 days in NC State.
7 games, 12 days is absolutely insane. Needing to win all of those consecutively to save your season is even crazier. And you're right, both of those are really good stories. NC State, especially with DJ Burns kind of being the face of the team in terms of not just his production, but it's a very big man. America loves a big man that captivates their hearts. And what's really funny is that, DJ Burns listed at 6'9", 275, and I think it's pretty generous to call him 275 because I'm pretty confident he's north of that. If Colorado were to have held on, and we could have gotten DJ Burns against Eddie Lampkin, who was at 6'11", listed at 265, but he ain't 265. That's also pretty generous. These men are both flirting with 3 bills here. If we could have gotten both of those guys playing together, I saw a really funny tweet, and I can't remember who to credit for, but it mentioned the first post up between those two would cause an earthquake. Unlike anything we've ever seen before in terms of magnitude. But that would have been really funny to have those two very large individuals bouncing against each other in the post. We were so close to getting that.
Yeah, and again, like you said, I think DJ Burns kind of stole everyone's hearts, through the ACC tournament and his great play through those 5 games where, again, their back was up against the wall and they couldn't lose any of those if they wanted to make the NCAA tournament. But seeing him and Golke go up against each other was pretty interesting. And it's hard to answer this question now because we're so quickly removed from it. But, when we talk about all-time, impact guys when it comes to the NCAA tournament, I feel like Golke's going to be one of those guys that we remember forever just because how unorthodox that game was against Kentucky.
How unorthodox that game was, how unique of a story his is.
Sure.
And unique of a player he is. I mean, we see 3-point specialists all the time. Like Fletcher McGee at Wofford was one of those guys who was an absolute marksman of a shooter. But you know what? He drove a little bit. He would shoot 2s. He was really good at drawing fouls. This guy only plays basketball to let it bleep and fly from 3-point range. And that's all he does. And that's all he had to do against Kentucky for them to pull off that upset was him to make 10 of those. And the guy's launched 37 threes in the 2 games he played.
I'm convinced he's allergic to paint.
Yeah, he's got to be. Paint or contact, because he's even good at avoiding contact when running off screens.
Yeah.
But he, in terms of his story, his unorthodox, style of play where he is married to only one thing on the basketball floor and, just his overall appearance and goofiness, sticking the tongue out after threes. He gave a Jordan shoulder shrug after his 6-3 in the first half against Kentucky. We might see 3 or 4 different shots of him in one shining moment. And then for NCAA or tournament promos from here on out, you're going to see shots of Jack Golke. When we think of what makes this tournament so awesome, we think of Jack Golke.
And when he's teaching geography to a high school class in 8 or 10 years, when March rolls around, he's like, guys, let me tell you a little story
about me almost ending John Calipari's coaching career for working for a $33 million buyout.
Now, his hairline might be all the way receded back at that point in time, but regardless, it'll be a good story to tell.
He would have to tell the students, yes, this is me pre-hair loss, but this is...
So you brought it up. The Calipari thing's pretty interesting. Because there's a lot of conversation. A decision is going to be made. Now, that could mean that he's staying. And again, $33 million, that's a pretty steep buyout. But there's a standard of basketball up in Lexington that he has not met over these past handful of years, really since COVID.
Yeah.
They've not been able to get out of the second round. And when you're talking about Kentucky, a blue blood, especially when you're losing to teams that you really have no business losing to, because let's face it, if Kentucky and Oakland played 9 more times, Kentucky's probably winning at least 8 of those games.
Yep.
And that's
At least.
you're just looking at the discrepancy between talent on both rosters. And you say, how do you lose to this team? Now, yes, Oakland, very experienced. Jack Golke's 84 years old, has been on college basketball for a very long time. And unfortunately, that does come back to bite a Kentucky that, really builds its roster on young guys, the future NBA draft picks, the one-and-dones, and all that type of stuff. But still, that's not an excuse from the fan base's standpoint to lose the way that they have. And I'm not counting on it, but if you told me that this time tomorrow they were looking for a new head basketball coach, I wouldn't be shocked.
I wouldn't be either. And I think here's the thing that frustrates a lot of that fan base. It's not just the losing. The losing is bad enough. Dropping 1 2 years ago to St. Peter's as a 2 seed, bad enough. Dropping 1 to Oakland as a 3 seed, just as bad, maybe worse now that, the first thing happened. But what I think grinds a lot of gears in Lexington, Kentucky, is how he handles it and doesn't really take a lot of blame for the losses.
Sure.
He definitely had the quote after the Oakland loss where he says, hey, if you go back and look at all the mistakes we made at the end of the game, they were freshmen. Our young guys didn't pull through, which, he's right. Reed Shepherd had a horrific game. Rob Dillingham did not play well. And those two have never been accused of playing good defense, nor will they, without significant coaching, might never.
No, nobody on Kentucky's been playing good defense this year.
Exactly. But the fact that he immediately points to inexperience as one of the reasons why they lost that game late is a poor excuse because, buddy, when you're 30-plus games into a season, Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham aren't freshmen anymore.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, those guys are sophomores. They've played a full season of basketball. We cannot use the freshman mistakes. We can't just have the freshman mistakes. So, A, we can't even do that. And, B, if you wanted to give him that excuse, why is their roster so loaded with underclassmen in an era of college basketball in which teams are getting older and better every single year? Yes, he did get Antonio Reeves, who was their leading scorer this year from the transfer portal in Illinois State, a guy who played 5 years of college basketball. Good. Oh, and your starting center, Trey Mitchell, is playing about his 5th year of college basketball for his 4th different school. Okay, well, there you got older, but that's 2 players.
Sure.
You play about 8. The other 6 cannot be just true freshman and sophomore. You're the one building the team, guy. You're the one building the team. Ask yourself if this is why you're losing the game, or losing these games to St. Mary's and to Oakland in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and you want to say that youth is a reason why, well, I guess he should take that up with the person who builds the roster, which is him.
I was going to say he's going to have to change up his entire recruiting strategy because it's not that it is easy to still recruit even when you're at Kentucky, but saying, hey, come play for me. You'll be a lottery pick. You'll be a one and done. That's pretty much it, which is why all the McDonald's All-Americans, all the 5-stars want to go to Kentucky because they know that's a very easy pathway to the NBA. But in turn, especially in today's world of college basketball where the transfer portal is so prevalent, where a team, look at what South Carolina did this past offseason, just going out there, bringing in so much experience, which helped them tremendously take steps forward, where Kentucky, you can do that. Like you said, you can put 2, maybe 3 guys in your, on the court doing that, but you still have all these super talented freshmen that want to play for you that aren't just going to sit on the bench.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows? He might end up losing a lot of those guys. Aaron Bradshaw is a guy whose NBA draft status completely tanked because he was getting 2 minutes a game towards the end of the season. You can probably lose him if you don't talk him into coming back. Who knows what Avicic does in terms of returning next year, and if Cal's coming back, which I assume he is, just because that buyout is so hefty after this year that it's going to take maybe another embarrassing loss, I guess, for this to happen. But he's got examples everywhere of what other teams have done to evolve and adapt to what really a new era of college basketball is. And, the fans in Lexington aren't going to care how many all-pro, all NBA players you produce, right? He touted, what was it, the
$4 billion.
Yeah, exactly. $4 billion that he's earned players, which is great. And that's good for him. And that's a really cool thing that if I'm a coach, I would love to tout. But you know what?
Do they hang banners for $4 billion?
They don't. They don't hang banners for that. And fans aren't going to want to spend their hard-earned money to go to games at Rupp Arena, where now they're experiencing, this past year, they experienced a historic losing streak in that building. you can't just sit back and say, hey, look at the NBA All-Star game. We produced 7 of those guys. They won't care because of those 7 guys, only one of them won a national title with you, and only like 2 of them got to go to a Final Four with you.
How many folks in Lexington do you think actually watch the NBA? I know a lot of their former players in there, but I don't think they care too much about what they do at the next level.
Nope, I don't think Devin Booker becoming a perennial All-NBA player makes them feel better about 2015. In fact, it might make them feel worse because Devin Booker played 11 minutes in that Final Four loss to Wisconsin. So maybe if they do watch it, it makes them feel worse instead of hearing, hey, we produce all these NBA stars, and it just doesn't matter. Because in theory, you should be going to more than one Final Four in 9 years.
You would think, and now we're going to be past 12 years since he last won a national championship, which by Kentucky standards is not good.
By Kentucky standards, that's like 50 years.
No, pretty much.
That's half a century for them. They can't wait that long. Especially without a Final Four. Like, this is now John Calipari's personal longest run without going to a Final Four. We've reached 9 years now. He's never gone since he's coached. Since he made his first Final Four, has not gone more than 9 years without going to another Final Four. We've approached that now.
So we'll see what happens in Lexington and see if maybe they're looking for a new coach this time tomorrow. We'll come back and hit the greatest day in the history of the world. It is March the 25th. He's Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head. It's the halftime show on the game. Welcome back in. It's halftime show. Tyra Head and Elijah Campbell along with you here on your Monday on the game. Before we get into the greatest day in the history of the world, quick reminder about the 107.5 The Game Spring Golf Tournament coming up on April the 5th out at Hardwood Golf Club in West Columbia. If you want to take part, $400 for a foursome, $200 for a pair, 10 a.m. shotgun start. Going to have giveaways for things like USC baseball tickets, Carowinds tickets, concert tickets, scrap your passports, and more. If you want to take part, give Charlie a call, 803-755-2000 to register. Again, 803-755-2000 to register. It is indeed the greatest day in the history of the world, March the 25th. Going to go all the way back to 1937. It is revealed that the Quaker Oats Company pays Babe Ruth $25,000 per year to be a part of its ads. Now, I want you to take a wild guess at how much $25,000 in 1937 during the Great Depression is worth in today's money.
Oh, man, we got to be getting close to, I'll go 750,000 million.
Not quite. Maybe come down a little bit.
So overshot that a little too much.
Just a little bit.
500,000.
Okay, you're close. $538,760.42.
Okay.
It has an inflation rate of 2,055.
Wow. Quaker Oats forking over money when no one else had money. Just for Babe Ruth to endorse the product.
I've seen a lot of like old Babe Ruth ads. I don't recall a Quaker Oats one though.
Nope, can't say I have either. I also have not seen a lot of Babe Ruth ads.
I mean, I think like beer and hot dogs and stuff like that. Sure,
he'd have been a great Budweiser endorser.
I'm sure. You think he like actually ate the oatmeal because that's kind of healthy. He wasn't known to be like the healthiest guy in the world.
No, he wasn't the perfect model of male health back in the 30s. But
well, actually, back then we didn't know a whole lot about health and nutrition and stuff like that. A huge guy that could smack home runs, that probably was like the symbol of health and fitness.
Were more baseball players watching him, guzzle 6 beers and down, 12 glizzies and thought, maybe that's what I need to do to start hitting.
Oh yeah,
hitting for power.
Just have a 12-pack after every or before every game. It is funny. I'll explain this past baseball. Like when you look at pictures of professional athletes from 30 and 40 years ago, and compared to today, it's a night and day difference. Like,
oh my God, yeah, drastic.
Some NFL players that were in their late 30s looked like they should have been in a retirement home in the 70s and 80s. Like, compare a picture of Ken Stabler and Tom Brady.
Oh, my God.
Ken Stabler
looks like he's 20 years older than Tom Brady.
Ken Stabler looked like he was on death's door every time he went out there on the field. Like, he had the gray hair and just like he looked very sickly and still playing, probably a little bit hungover. But just
a lot of bit hungover.
When you think about what it takes to be a professional athlete these days and what these guys were able to do back then, it's insane.
My favorite sports picture, one of my favorite sports pictures, and it's actually one that our man, David Dare is wearing on a T-shirt right now, is Len Dawson sitting in a chair in the locker room after losing Super Bowl I, just ripping a cigarette while having a glass bottle of Fresca at his feet. Like that's what players were doing after games back then, just ripping heaters and drinking soda. At least in the locker room.
We've come a long way.
Yeah, exactly. It would be news outside of like Vlade Divac, it's from 1990 on, if anybody was ripping heaters in a locker room.
Could you imagine offering Ken Stabler or Bart Starr like some of like Tom Brady's diet of like organic fish and non-GMO vegetables and like, what is this crap?
Hey, it's a smoothie, but here's the thing. It's made of nothing but kale. It's a kale smoothie.
No, I'll eat this fried chicken instead. Thank you.
and down it with 6 more beers.
Right. 1934, the first Augusta National Invitation Tournament Masters is won by Horton Smith with a 20-foot birdie putt on the 17th hole, 1 stroke ahead of Craig Wood. We are, I guess we're going into the 90th edition of the Masters this year, or 90th anniversary
awesome.
at least.
Yeah. Hey, that's pretty cool. So, I mean, I guess in a decade's time, we'll be reaching 100.
Have you been out to Augusta where the course is?
I have not. I've always wanted to, and that's I think for every sports fan that should be a bucket list type thing. Just to see that place, just see it. You know.
So, well, here's the thing: you have to actually get in to see it. They do not allow the poors like us to look through the gates. I can assure you.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. I was in Augusta years ago. This was right before COVID hit, and I was out there, and I had some time to kill, and I thought, you know what? Because I'd only been there a handful of times in my life, I just want to go see where the course is. I wasn't going to get in. They weren't going to like let me see anything, but I wanted at least to like see the entrance, right?
Just
see where it is.
How close you could get.
Exactly. And in my mind, I'm picturing myself like driving through like these rich neighborhoods, like mansions and like all these perfectly trimmed lawns. And then like at the top of the hill, there's the golf course and the clubhouse and all like, this serenity scene out of a movie or something like that. When you go to Augusta, if you're driving to Atlanta from here or back from Atlanta from here, there's an exit in Augusta where there's just a ton of stuff. There's fast food and gas stations and Walmarts and all this kind of stuff. Civilization. And like, so I get off that exit, I'm following my map, and it's like, you're like half a mile away. And I'm like, there's a Taco Bell and there's like a Goodwill. I'm like, surely this can't be the area where this golf course is. And sure enough, you get to the end of this like strip mall, and right there is the entrance to Augusta National.
What? Next to a strip mall?
Pretty much. Like, it's just at the end of all this just random retail stuff. And there's the entrance. Now, again, it's like, it's very inconspicuous. Now, they do have the water tower that you can read, but like the gates are blacked out. If you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know it, which I had actually driven past it before and had no clue.
Wow. Oh, that's something. Yeah, for it to hide in plain sight.
Exactly.
Like that.
But I think about it from the perspective of like all these millionaire golfers, all these celebrities that go to Augusta National, and I'm just imagining them driving past all this stuff on their way into the most pristine golf course on planet Earth.
Like a Goodwill.
Exactly. Which, hey, there's nothing wrong with Goodwill.
I love Goodwill. Yeah, exactly. But I don't think Tiger Woods shops at Goodwill.
Tiger Woods doesn't know what Goodwill is.
Has he ever seen one?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Tiger Woods, given the regimen that he's on, I don't think he's ever eaten fast food either.
Exactly. Yeah. So for him to drive by through all that just to get to Augusta National is a funny mental image to me.
What is Taco Bell?
What is any of this? What is a Chipotle?
But yeah, and again, I'm probably never going to see the inside of it in my life, but to be sitting across the street in a thrift store parking lot looking at the entrance to Augusta National, weird feeling.
Is odd. That has to be very odd to know exactly the history of what has gone on behind those gates as you're sitting there looking at it in a thrift store parking lot.
It's funny to me because you don't even have to be a golf fan to appreciate the scenery and the coverage of the Masters with all the camera shots and obviously the pristine course, and they use the aerials and all that kind of stuff. Now when they do an aerial shot, I'm looking for them to show this road outside the course, and they never do. They
keep it compact inside the perimeter.
They always make it a point to, again, make this seem like this heaven of a place without any like connection to the real world outside of it. So they make it a point to never show this road. I forget the name of the road that leads into it, but it's like a main like 2-lane highway type thing with, again, every store and restaurant you can imagine on the way out there. But they make it a point to never show that on coverage of the Masters.
Now every time I watch the Masters, I'm just going to have the mental image of Tiger Woods or Jim Nantz, riding through a series of strip malls and thrift stores just to get into Augusta National.
I'll tell you this. You can go on Google Maps and go to Street View and see exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm going to.
And you're going to be like,
I'm absolutely going to.
This?
this is it. This is Augusta National. This is the picture of ideal golf destinations. Just in the middle of a shopping mall.
Hello, friends.
Jim Nantz here next to the Augusta Goodwill, also known as Amen Corner.
So yeah, I can't think of it any other way now. That's just awesome. Funny to me. All right, we'll come back and wrap up.
I like it even more now.
I know, right? We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Halftime Show. Hit our Firehouse subs. Text of the hour as well. He's Elijah Campbell. I'm Tyler Head here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler and Elijah along with you for a few more minutes. Time to hit the Firehouse Subs text of the hour. I got a lot of people weighing in on the Masters thing. So Chris in Sumter says, during Masters season, that road is a mess. I imagine it's called Washington Road, by the way. I imagine they prefer you to take Riverwatch Parkway and go in that way, which is much more scenic. Maybe that's the way that I'm envisioning that Jim Nance and Tiger Woods and all them have to go through. But if you are just driving around and you look up the address to Augusta National, it sends you to Washington Road.
See, we did the street view of it, and the way you described it was
exactly
pretty accurate. It was incredibly accurate. It does kind of just hide in plain sight.
It really does. And again, I'd driven past it before without even realizing. Like, yeah, you see the water tower there, but I didn't think that meant it was right at the entrance to the place. But maybe Riverwatch Parkway is the serene, heaven-like entrance of trees and mansions and, perfectly cut grass and all that kind of stuff that I was envisioning that I did not see when I went in this way.
Yeah, that was a fun exercise there to just take the street view of Augusta National and realize just how normal of a place it sits in. You just don't expect that.
I was going to say, with somebody like Tiger Woods, they probably just helicopter him in and let him land on the green so he doesn't have to see all that stuff.
It doesn't have to interact with normal people.
Exactly. Or he doesn't have to see all the fast food places. But maybe Riverwatch Parkway is a little bit more serene and more up to the standards of Augusta National.
That might be their preferred entranceway, I guess, as opposed to Washington. But that was something I was not ever expecting when thinking about the location.
That's the kind of thing that I think about too. Where I went to high school, we had a lot of, as I was, getting out of high school and going to college, we started having a lot of like high level recruits play football there, to where you'd have, Kirby Smart and, Nick Saban and a lot of high level coaches come and visit my high school. I'm from Covington, Georgia. It's nothing special. And, it's the same old regular town like anybody else's, and it certainly has its rough areas. And I always think about, because I remember one day I was driving and I saw Gus Malzahn flying in on the Auburn private jet, because he posted a picture like an hour later with one of the kids at the school. And I just think about that drive from the airport to my high school and just all the rundown homes and dilapidated businesses and everything that Gus Malzahn, this multimillionaire SEC football coach, had to look at en route to my old high school.
Wouldn't normally be caught dead there.
Oh,
you
sure.
know what is there so he can try to get this 5-star halfback.
Exactly. He didn't end up getting that 5-star half. I think it was a defensive back at that point in time. But it's just so funny to think like affluent people that go through my hometown or something like that, like this place.
I have to go to this place to try to get this kid.
Right. It's like, ooh, this kid better be worth it.
That's how you know they really, really want him. They're willing to go to Covington, Georgia for it.
That's right. It's definitely different. But gosh, I guess we're right at a month away from the Masters. Come to think of it.
Now, that's how I know we're getting close. Is whenever during March Madness, you get the
first commercial.
Promos. Yep, and you start hearing the piano, the piano riff, and is Jim Nance still going to do the Masters, or is he only stopped doing the NCAA tournament?
I think he's still doing the Masters. I think.
I know the last I saw of him was definitely at that wild Houston A&M game last night in Memphis.
Yeah.
Which out in Houston attire.
I mean, he's the voice of the Masters. Like, he has to keep doing it.
Or he has to be single-handedly anoint his successor.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because not everybody can do that. That is reserved for a very select few when it comes to broadcasting. Because you don't have to be a golf fan. You can not care about golf for the other 51 weekends of the year, but Masters weekend, it's a different story.
It's the Super Bowl of the sport,
Yeah,
like that's the premier event. I am a fan of the artist formerly known as the British Open. I think just call it the Open.
Okay,
but I do like the occasional 6 a.m., 7 a.m. early rounds of the Open, or a championship being awarded at like 10 a.m. locally.
I appreciate the Open for the god-awful weather they typically have out there.
Always playing in what it seems like the grayest part of the planet. Yes.
When you think about like England or Scotland or something like that, you just envision like no sunshine.
Gray.
And that really drives the point home.
Yes. Gray and, gray, rainy,
it's like
nasty weather.
It's like, this is depressing.
But like combining that with a course like St. Andrews, which is one of those aesthetically pleasing places on the planet.
Sure.
for some reason it fits. It just fits. It works. And I love watching. It always looks really cold.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm glad I'm watching this from the comfort of my own warm apartment.
Yes, exactly. Or in the warmer summertime here in America where it is, where it does look like it's like in the 50s.
Yeah, it's like, I'll pass.
Yeah, in Scotland at St. Andrews or wherever, Even though that is another bucket list golf course. Just to, not even play. I'm not a big golfer.
Sure.
But I love the aesthetic of golf courses. And St. Andrews is gorgeous. I would love to see that one.
Yeah, well, maybe we can get lucky and sneak our way into Augusta National one of these days.
It would require us sneaking into it.
It really would.
It would. We'll have to discuss our details on how we'll do it off air. But
well, as far as I know, the security's pretty tight there. I don't think we're going to have too much success.
This is going to take years of scouting, but this is a years-long plan.
Just
now that we know where it's at. Now that we know where it's hiding.
Well, here's the thing. We can go to the thrift store across the street, buy some clothes to get us in. So that way we'll at least look the part, right? All right. we're hatching our plan.
That's right.
Post-game show coming up next. What y'all got coming out everybody's way? That's
right. We got the head coach of the South Carolina baseball team, Mark Kingston, joining us for his weekly visit at 3:30, talking a lot about the tail kicking that Don's team did yesterday and a whole lot more in the college hoops offseason.
All right. That's next on the post-game show here on The Game.